So welcome everyone, welcome to the public talk. Rangjung Yeshe Institute is really happy to have Alexander van Rospatt with us. This is always an honor to have great scholars with us. For those of you who might not know Rangjung Yeshe is the Center for Buddhist Studies of Kathmandu University. It's situated in Bodhanath. Our focus is mostly not only Buddhist languages. I guess we could say it's one of our strengths. So teach Sanskrit and Tibetan, but also we have classes in Pali and more recently in Chinese. So Buddhist languages in general. We also offer Buddhist studies in looking at texts, so a strong textual study tradition at Rangjung Yeshe. We also have a program of translation. So if you're interested in translation, this is really a good place to come, a really good program with great support for this learning. Both in traditional approach and in contemporary and academic approach, joining together. The public talk series is kind of in support of all the studies that are going on at Rangjung Yeshe. So because Bodhanath is so central in the Buddhist world in many ways, we have had over the years the pleasure of receiving so many different scholars who come by there and who are generous enough to come and talk at Rangjung Yeshe. Since the COVID, we also did this online, so we have a chance to kind of continue this tradition of scholarly discussion on different topics. And today we're looking at Newar Buddhism. So you will see as we go forward, there will be more and more talks on Newar Buddhism that will occur. And Alex is one of those scholars who has specialized particularly on this. So Alex is a scholar and a professor in Berkeley University in Buddhist and South Asian Studies. He's director of the group in Buddhist Studies also. He specializes in the doctrinal history of Indian Buddhism and in Newar Buddhism, the only Indic Mahayana tradition that continues to persist in its original South Asian setting. That means in Kathmandu Valley, right to the present. His first book sets forth the development and early history of Buddhist doctrine of momentariness. His new book, the Swayambhu Chaita and its renovation, deals with the historical renovation of Swayambhu stupa of Kathmandu based on the Newar manuscripts and several years of fieldwork in Nepal. He reconstructs the ritual history of these renovations and their social context. And most recently, he's looked into rituals in the Newar tradition. So please welcome with me, Alex.
Thank you, Diane. Can I take over?
Yes, you
Since
can.
Time is always precious.
Yes.
Let me thank you very much for the invitation, and let me echo with a few words that Rangjung Yeshe Institute is really a wonderful institution. We at Berkeley have profited from wonderfully prepared graduate students who've gone on to write wonderful dissertations. The latest addition to our program is Lawrence, a few years before Paul Thomas and Catherine Dalton, who is now professor at Rangjung Yeshe. We really appreciate the preparation they come with for Tibetan and Sanskrit studies. It probably is also a good idea that you added Chinese Buddhism on, but I'm particularly happy and grateful that you're not studying all of these rich religious Buddhist traditions without paying attention to Newar Buddhism. This is a topic that is dear to my own interests, and it is a topic that I think it's sadly understudied. Artifacts, Nepalese art, are well studied, and they are represented at major museums. They constantly go on sale, Sotheby's, Christie's, and elsewhere. So they certainly are in circulation, but their religious context is very poorly understood and not studied sufficiently. So a plea that I would like to make for more studies of Nepalese Buddhism, not a grand studies like the excellent monograph by David Gellner, but rather particular topics like what Father Sharkey has done on the Nitya Puja, and Bruce Owens on Karuna Maya. We're all looking forward to Christoph Emrich's book on the Ihi rituals. So this is very important. These kind of works need to be grounded in field work. That certainly holds good for Father Sharkey's work, Christoph Emrich's work, Bruce Owens, and if I may say so, also for my own work, and I will be showing a little bit of this. And I also want to make a plea that we pay attention to material culture and to religious artifacts. This is what I'm going to try to do in the talk, and I must add that I'm not trained as an art history. And when it goes into the minute details of iconography, I'm really out of my depths, and I rely on the generous help of colleagues like Kunsang Lama of Paris, who studied the Laksha Chaitya and the Tsatsa production and rituals in her wonderful work. So I'd like to start off with this particular play, which is on display in the Rubin Museum in New York, and which I'm very fond of. It's a little bit atypical of the objects that are prepared on the occasion of the first old age ritual, on the occasion of the bhīmarathārohaṇa, but it captures many key elements. So I want to kind of start with this. We see in the center of the stupa, or if I may call it chaitya, a depiction of Ushnisha Vijaya, the Dharini goddess of long life, in characteristic iconography, supporting with her upper right arm and three-headed a Buddha statue, as it's described in the Sadhana Mala and in other texts. And she's complemented by Manjushri on the right side. And Manjushri is there for a reason. Can I ask, is the cursor visible as I move across the screen, or probably not? Huh?
A little bit, slightly.
Okay, great. So a point that I want to make, it's obviously Swayambhu, and all of us know how the stupa looks. And it's very characteristically, importantly depicted in its mythological context, standing on a lotus flower, supported on a lotus flower, that according to the Swayambhu Purana, a groove came forth from the lake that once upon covered the Kathmandu Valley. And according to the story that is so well known, we all know Manjushri assisted the draining of the lake and facilitated the worship of Swayambhu. So he plays an important role. But of course, in many ways, more intriguing, central, is the chariot here pulled by horses and pulling two elders, a turbaned male figure with his wife. And these objects, fortunately, are accompanied by inscriptions. So part of my plea to study these objects please do pay attention to the inscriptions. Yes, typically they're Nevari, but there are many Newar specialists who can help with reading them, and actually pays off learning it. So I don't want to read the whole this inscription, but just to see at the beginning, Swasti, Shri Tin, and then Ushnisha Vijaya, Shuvarnaya Patima Dayako. So the construction, the making of an image of golden representation of Ushnisha Vijaya that we can see, but in a sense more important what we have at the bottom here. Here it actually tells us about the occasion. So it says Svargarohaṇa, rather than saying the mounting of the bhīmarathārohaṇa, but it means ascent to the heavens, which is part of what is meant to be facilitated by this ritual. And here it says Jata Janko Yanga Julo. So having performed the Janko for elders. As many of you will know, there's also a Janko for children, the rice feeding ceremony. And this particular Janko ritual is performed for elders, as we see them, as we can see them here seated on the chariot. The chariot is known as bhīmarathārohaṇa, so it's not entirely clear why it's known this way. But the key point that I will introduce and show you that these icons, they're not just commemorative, they are commemorative. Here we have at the end of the line, we have the date, Samvat 896. So this translates into 1775. Using the online calculator, we know that this is November 11, 17,750. So basically it's 250 years old, this wonderful object. It must have been prepared ahead of the ritual performance. So not only does it record a particular ritual, and it actually plays a crucial function in the course of the ritual, which I like to show you here. So this is a particular occasion on which this ritual was performed in Mepi, just off Rospatt in Kathmandu, maybe some like 14 years ago, if I remember correctly. And so these two elders, they're seen seated on their respective chariots. The idea is that the gentleman presumably is older than his wife, has just turned 77 years, 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days. So this is a particular sensitive threshold. He has completed a full set of 7. So in Nepal and India, complete sets come in 7, like for us, 12, a dozen. And just the number beyond the complete set is slightly inauspicious. Just for us, the 13 is inauspicious. And I understand that typical staircase Nepalese houses don't have 8 steps, just 7 steps, lest the 8th step becomes precarious. So this is at Mepi, so below the Yogamba shrine that probably many of you know, which is wonderful to visit. So this is on the occasion of the performance of the ritual. So this is what I want you to closely look at. I'll talk more about this particular pauba painting that was performed as that was produced as an icon to be used in the ritual, to be consecrated in the ritual. And you can see it here again, many other objects that are also being consecrated, and actually girls who have the Ihi ritual performed for themselves. Here you see the girls lined up, next to the two elders. The two elders are the principal protagonists in the ritual, but the girls are important agents and participants as well. This is a shot of the larger ritual arena that I want you to take good note of. So this is the main priest wearing a helmet. This is actually an assistant priest who performed many rituals, Sarbagnya. And the third priest performing here rituals is actually not only Vajracharya priest, but he's also the painter of this icon, Gautam Ratna Vajracharya. So during all of these objects here positioned on the altar, if you want to call it this, are being consecrated in a complex ritual. And here you see Sarbagnya actually doing the touching the different Tathagatas on the painting in order to animate them, in order to imbue them with life. These are very complex rituals that I've treated in considerable detail in the essay that I'm showing you here in the slide, that partially draws actually also on the research done for the ritual that you can see here. This is actually a very important mandala part of, so this is this mandala basically here. And the idea is that the different vessels represent deities of the Vajradhatu mandala, the main mandala of the Yoga Tantra tradition in the Nepalese tradition, and the various deities to be consecrated are then sprinkled with waters from each of the vessels so as to be imbued with the quality of the mantra, of the mandala. But more important and for our purposes right now is the performance of rituals dedicated to the Pancharakshas and the 9 planetary deities. So the Pancharakshas are distributed in circle around the main mandal, and the 9 planetary deities, including the lunar, the stellar constellation called Janma Nakshatra in Sanskrit. So these are propitiated in the course of the ritual. In the hollow and below the mandala is actually the horoscope of the elders, so that the whole thing benefits them. It's in many ways you could call it an apotropaic ritual. The idea is to ward off negative influences of graha of the planets at this critical age of 77. And the central mandala here is this mandala here I show you in better detail here. So these are the 5 Rakshasa, and then around here the 5 Pancha Rakshasa, and around here we have the grahas. We also have here so-called Uṣṇīṣa deities, but I don't want to get into great details. Just another example of the same mandala. What is important, what matters to me is that they've been used in ritual performances I've recorded. That makes them really precious sources. This is the owner, Tejrajna Vajracharya. So it's a Graha mandala, that's the idea. So the Chomor, to read it, Chomor means painter or writer, is Gautam Ratna Vajracharya, whom we've already, the same person who painted this here and whom we see again. So in addition to worshipping all of these different kind of baskets dedicated to the deities, each basket and so on is then basically turned into an offering by the elders, an epotropaic offering, as you can see here. And what is very interesting is that you also need Brahmins at the ritual as recipients. So as far as the grahas, Sun, Aditya, Mangal, Tuesday, Shani, Rahu, and Ketu, they all have to be gifted to a Brahmin priest, and the Pancharakshas and the other grahas, including moon, are given to the Buddhist priests. And on top of it, they can also offer a cow to a Brahmin priest who is assisting here. So there are various ways in which this Buddhist ritual, drawing on standard Buddhist deities, is intermingled with the Hindu tradition. This has got nothing to do with syncretism. There is no mistaking at all of the register which is completely Buddhist. But of course, the Buddhists in Kathmandu, as we all know, live in close proximity with the Hindu traditions, and they draw on them and they interact with them, however, without any syncretistic blending. So before the two elders mounted the chariot, they this is from a different Janko, they were actually sanctified by a bath, by a snana. So this is a typical element of a sanskara, of a sanctification ritual. So in many ways, the vocabulary of this ritual draws on the sanskaras, on the life cycle rituals. So it's performed the snana not only for the elder, but also for the children. And afterwards, the elders mount the chariot, and the chariot immediately is not in motion. You can see the small wheels here. And since they've been sacralized by this ritual, it's more than just sacralization. It is quasi-deification that has gone on. So afterwards, the elders, the family worships the elders. This particular person was one of the Ajus seniors from Bubahal in Patan. And this is his son and his daughter-in-law. And of course, doom by and large like this, but they're also sprinkled with the feet with the water. And they do something they normally wouldn't do because, of course, the water is considered to be juto after the touch with the feet. But they will actually sprinkle the water over themselves and even use the water to moisten their mouth and lip and touch their eyes, just as they do after worshipping gods. So in a sense, they're considered to be quasi-prasad. Also during or after the ritual, particularly during the rituals, they're not only considered to be quasi-divine, but the idea is that they bless family members and that their blessing really is powerful, much more powerful than it would normally be. It's also a moment when you don't want to mess with granddad, because not only blessing, but also the curse becomes powerful. Shapalakta, as they say in Nepalese. Okay, once this has happened, the next really important moment is the yatra, the chariot procession. This is again this Aju from Bubahal in Patan. And interestingly, the idea is that the elder is pulled by his grandchildren. And here is a particular vessel in red, and it's symbolized stands in a Buddhist context, arguably for Vajrayogini, and anyway, for his wife. The ritual is always undergone by a couple. And if the person is a widower or widow, then the deceased spouse participates in this way. So I want to return to these iconic paintings. This is Gautam Ratna Bajracharya, priest and painter, who painted this particular pauba. Maybe just a brief word about him. He's actually recently passed away, but he did very, very high quality paintings of the whole Vajravali cycle, principally as commissioned by Professor Tachikawa from Japan, Musashi Tachikawa, principally from Nagoya. And very valuable work that he's done before deceasing. And both him and his brothers are, of course, proud sons of a very illustrious Vajracharya from Kathmandu, Ratnakaji Vajracharya, to whom I have an enormous debt for actually introducing me to all of these rituals and the details. Okay, so this is the pauba that Gautam painted before. As you've seen, it's used in the ritual as an icon. And the lower register, it includes the fire ritual, it includes the procession, it correctly captures the fact that both of the elders are alive and sit in their respective chariot, and it records here their name. A very important detail also, the inscriptions reveal that the real sponsors of the ritual are not the elders, but their children, principally their sons. They have to organize the ritual. It kind of happens to the elders, but strictly speaking, the Yajamana are the senior family members. So this is another painting from the Yucca collection, of course, much more impressive from an art historical perspective, much more important. I'll talk a little bit more, but I want to focus for a moment on the lower register capturing the ritual. So the way it works, starting from the right, it should be read to the left, i.e. it proceeds in chronological order. What we have had here on the far right, let me just see, this is a little bit cut off, unfortunately, is the, wait, that's not quite the way I would have liked it to be. Something went wrong here. Never mind. Let me go back. No, let me go to here again. So from the right, the first scene is the snana or the abhisheka. Afterwards, the elders have mounted a throne and they're worshipped here with feet, again, as we've seen before. Then they proceed to ride on the chariot, and they do depict as with horses, but of course they're not real horses. The chariot is understood to be of the sun, so there's some equation with the sun taking place. And again, the pullers are not adults, children, so the grandchildren of the celebration one. So this is another pauba, just with another neat detail to show you. Here, the male person precedes, it's all his grandsons. And here's his wife, and she is pulled only by granddaughters. That's indeed what I've seen in practice happen. In this particular painting, the artist decided not to depict a horse, but a real horse, but just a kind of iconized horse. So in the case of the ritual that I've shown you, this is actually what happens. The horses are here. Normally, the horses are just present by placing flags onto the chariot. So we have the procession at the far end is the Homa ritual, which may be depicted earlier. So there is some variation, which is very interesting to look at, which I think it pays off looking at. So the lowest register has the donors, and typically on the left side, on the right side, the ladies. And just another detail from this pauba, this is from the San Francisco Museum of Art. So you see all of the ladies here, and actually, interestingly, they can all be, they all have captions, they can all be identified. They're mentioned in the inscription, and they're shown together with their daughters. So these are the granddaughters. So one certainly important function of these paubas is to kind of record family history. And this obviously a lot has to do with izat, with family honor. So beyond these ritual details and recording the family history, of course, if you look at the larger painting, this is a depiction of a stupa, of Swayambhu, unmistakably, and again, very clearly embedded in its ritual context. Resting on the lotus, arising from the waters of the Kathmandu Valley. And let's look a little bit more at the iconographic details. So this pauba, it's used in conjunction with the ritual that I've shown you. It's the same occasion on which it was produced so far that I've been talking about. So, as you will remember, a very important part of the ritual is the propitiation of the planetary deities and also of the pancharakshas. So they are depicted actually around here, the planetary deities, and the pancharakshas here in the socle of stupa. I'm going to zoom in later on the stupa and on these deities here. But let's have a look here at the moment at this wonderful depiction of the pancharakshas. Little bit cut off here, or maybe not actually for you guys. Not actually, it's okay what you see. Just realizing that the power yeah. So this is exactly the way it was meant to be. And so here we go through the different planetary deities. As you probably know, they map onto the weekdays. So Aditya, you can see here, Sunday. Next Monday, Somvar. Next Mangal. They can all be identified also with confidence because of the Vahana supporting them, but they all have wonderful captions. So this makes this particular painting really nice. This is Shani here, and we have Rahu here, and Ketu here. And so the sequence is not exactly as it was meant to be. So this is Janman, this is birth here. Yeah. So there's some break here. I actually ran out of steam here at some stage. Let me just see what happened. So this was Soma, and this is, I think, Brihaspati, and yeah, here's Brihaspati. This is Buddhavar. So this was Mangalbar. Mangal, this is Buddha. Sorry, I didn't use the cursor well. So now we are at Brihaspati. Now we are Shukra, Friday, and this is Saturday, Shani, of course, highly inauspicious. This, by the way, is a reason why Shani is gifted to a Brahmin rather than a Buddhist priest, so that the inauspiciousness is absorbed by the Hindu Brahman. This is Rahu, one of the two, number 8 and 9, nakshetras, which does not map, who don't map onto a planetary deity. And what we have here is Janman. In other words, the 10th deity in the set is the birth constellation under which the elders have been born. Okay, so all of the deities that are propitiated in this ritual are taken care of, but however, the place inside the Chaitya, the place of honor, belongs to Ushnisha Vijaya. And she actually doesn't feature explicitly in the ritual. She features in some oblique ways. And as I will explain to you in a moment, there are further old age rituals where she's really prominent. And of course, it makes sense to worship. So pacifying the planets and seeking the protection from the Pancharaksha deities, the protectress deities, makes a lot of sense. But propitiating Ushnisha Vijaya also makes a lot of sense, because she, as you know, she adds, this is the goddess for longevity. So she assures not only that you pass safely beyond the 7 into the 80s and 800 into the 80s, but also can add further years. So it makes sense that she's there. This deity is something of a puzzler in this context. I've consulted with learned colleagues and friends like Kunsang Lama, also Christian Nutzanet, whom I mentioned. Christian thought this is a version of Dharmadhatu Vagishvara, because obviously to be identified with Manjushri, and this identification with Manjushri makes sense given how prominent Manjushri here is, and also more importantly, given how important he is in the Swayambhu Purana, in the Swayambhu myth. And maybe, so just a close up here, but maybe more importantly, Dharmadhatu Vagishvara is often identified with Swayambhu. Very often in invocations of Swayambhu, Swayambhu is identified as Dharmadhatu Vagishvara. And this particular mandala also plays an important role in rituals surrounding Swayambhu. So that there's one can make sense of Dharmadhatu Vagishvara here. However, he doesn't really play an obvious role in the old age rituals, but the depiction of Ushnisha Vijaya in the Swayambhu stupa may have called for this. Just to be sure, on my reading, the point of this icon is not to depict Swayambhu, but to depict the goddess of longevity, Ushnisha Vijaya, because she's so important at this stage of life. And according to iconographic manuals, she needs to be depicted inside the dome of a stupa. And what stupa to choose if you're a Nepalese artist and if you're in the Newar tradition? Of course, you choose Swayambhu as the most important stupa, as the archetypal stupa or chaitya, if you want to use the word. So I like to look beyond the yucca pauba. So this is another, it's of more recent vintage, a pauba that belongs to Vajracharya family from Makan Bahal in Kathmandu. This is a precious, for me, this is precious because I chanced upon this with a family of friends And this was in their puja room. So when I talked about what I'm studying, they brought out this painting. So the idea of these icons is that they're not just commemorative, but they're consecrated during the ritual. And afterwards, they're put up, they're brought to the puja kota, to the house shrine, and worshipped daily by the elders. So the iconography here, but at this stage, it's somehow known to us. So the ritual is performed here, the bathing here, and the worship of the elders, and then the procession of the elder, and the fire ritual with the priests. In the center, we have again Ushnisha Vijaya, and these 4 protector deities. They're also depicted in the other painting that I showed before you, but since it's more cluttered, it's less obvious. They're protector deities, and they belong to the configuration with Ushnisha Vijaya. That's why they're here. And what I want to briefly look here is the lower deity here. So a little bit puzzling. This deity here does not wield a sword, but instead a mala, yes, a pustak, a book, a poti book, but not a sword. So that makes it a lot more difficult to identify this deity with any confidence as Damodhatu Vagishvara or Manjushri. And indeed, it turns out this is not a singular exception. There are many other paubas like this. This is from the private collection of Mary Slasser, which is now in the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So the lower one, as you can see here, again, it's a mala, it's not a sword. Just to show you the painting in total, because it's a wonderful painting. Again, you can see the protective deities here and here for Ushnisha Vijaya, and the 9 grahas plus Janmata nakshatra surrounding. But the point here is, again, as I said before, we have a deity that does wield the sword in the fashion of Manjushri. And why would, if this were Manjushri, why would have the artist choose not depict the sword? And I owe all of the remarks now to Kuntsang Lama. She pointed out to me that there are depictions of a form of Lokeshwar with, again, very similar, with a consort here on the lap. So this wonderful painting here, which went on sale at an art gallery called Saffron Art. And the iconography is very, very similar, but this is not a painting prepared for a bhīmarathārohaṇa, an old age ritual, but we are in the lucky situation that there is a caption and an invocation. So here we can read Sukhavati, and the invocation, the inscription starts with an invocation of what's probably Sukhavati Lokeshwara. So there are similar other depictions of this deity that can be identified with Sukhavati Lokeshwara. So on that basis, one could argue this must be Sukhavati Lokeshwara here, and this should also be Sukhavati Lokeshwara. I am not sure about the wisdom of giving so much agency to iconography. I would feel much more comfortable identifying this with Sukhavati Lokeshwara. if this particular form of Lokeshwar featured in the ritual, and it does not, as far as I know, in ritual handbooks, and nor in my fieldwork did I chance upon this. But then again, it makes a lot of sense to have Sukhavati invoked here, because the elders hope and aspire for rebirth in Sukhavati. So it's an excellent and plausible choice to have this particular form of Lokeshwar depicted here. And whether it was a deliberate choice in order to imbue the pauba with the additional efficacy to assure rebirth of the elders in Sukhavati, I don't know. Anyway, it's interesting for me to see that iconography and text and field work, what happens on the ground, don't always go hand in hand. But it's really important, I think, to look at differences. So yet another version. This is a further pauba that I chanced upon at a performance of the old age ritual at the bottom of Durbar at a family, Sakya family. So you can again see here the four protector deities, Ushnisha Vijaya. But here in the center, this is definitely not Manjushri. And it's definitely not a form of Lokeshwara. So actually it is Vasundhara, or Vasudhara, to pronounce her name this way. And as I will show you in a moment, Vasudhara actually plays, at least notionally, an important role in the old age rituals, because the idea is, so there are various things you want to have happen once you turn 77. So you want to be protected as you pass over this critical threshold. You want to be spared from the potentially malign effects of the planets. That's one thing, protection. Another thing, you want to be assured to live in a reasonable affluence, to be provided for. And that's exactly what Vasudhara stands for. As you know, she's the goddess for agricultural wealth. And of course, Ushnisha Vijaya is also welcome to prolong life. And then finally, as we've seen, Lokeshwara, Sukhavati, they also point to the idea that you're reborn in Sukhavati. So all of these things kind of make sense. But this is a little bit of an outlier here, but maybe not as much of an outlier as I've been thinking. So we're coming back to this painting. Painted by Gautam, and he made a point to me saying, this is Ushnisha Vijaya, this is Vasudhara, and this goddess is called, he said, Graha Matrika. So this is the mother of the planetary deity who basically stands for the totality of the planets. So the idea being, you've got apotropaic rituals presented, Vasudhara presented for affluence, and Ushnisha Vijaya for longevity. So this painting, also made for such a ritual, was produced by the brother of Gautam, so this Gautam. This was painted by the brother Sarvajñaratna, and as you can see here in center, it has the same sequence of the three deities, unmistakably Ushnisha Vijaya with the depiction here. This also is Vasudhara with the Varada gift-granting posture, also the vase of abundance. Here I'm struggling more to really make this deity appear to be Graha Matrika, but definitely what Sarvajña and Gautam intended to depict. And interesting, intriguing, they pointed to the cycle of Vajravali paintings that, the cycle going many ways back to Abhayakaragupta. And Gautam, whom I mentioned before, knows that cycle very well. And certainly so did his father, Ratnakaji. And this is a very intriguing tableau from Ngorchen, commissioned by Ngorchen, from the founder of Ngor Monastery in Tibet. We know that Nepalese artists were involved in the production of this last tableau. And it shows mandalas that are actually not part of the standard Vajravali cycle. So they are kind of appendices, and they very much match onto the old rituals, old age rituals, if you read them the way Gautam and Sabagnya do. These are the 5 Rakshasa, the 5 protectors, goddesses. These are the grahas, including Navagraha, Grahamatrika here. And this is Vasudhara. And this is the Ushnisha Vijaya mandala, just in a little bit more detail here. So this is the planetary deities. And here we have, and here, sorry, this is not quite the way I wanted it to be anyway. So the idea is of these, that these depictions of the 3 deities capture the same that this tableau captures, the worship of the 5 protector goddesses and the planetary deities here of Vasundhara and of Ushnisha Vijaya. So there is more than the bhīmarathārohaṇa that we've been looking at. There's 2 further old age rituals, as you can see, and they're dedicated. The next one is dedicated to Vasudhara, and the next one to Uṣṇīṣa Vijayā. My apologies for the typos, should of course be a long A. And this is what one finds in ritual handbooks. And this particular ritual is indeed performed in Patan. Just a few images to introduce you to this wonderful ritual. This is here the mandala of, this is the mandala here of Uṣṇīṣa Vijaya with the surrounding deities. Again, offerings are made of each basket by the celebrated person. And she is actually pulled up into the house on a ramp on the occasion, because she's considered to be so divine that she can no longer enter the house through the ground floor, which is impure, where you've got bathroom and other facilities. So this is the 3rd one, and here the deification is furthest. And in practice, this ritual is performed in Patan, not in Kathmandu. And the next one, the one dedicated to Vasundhara, is actually not really performed. And instead, it's performed, the 2nd ritual is dedicated to Moon, which is a particular magnificent ritual. On the occasion of the 1000th full moon, these elders step onto the terrace of their kaushi, of their house, and they worship the moon. And they're also, this is a different occasion, lay out an intricate mandala dedicated to the moon here, all white, all vegetarian in this particular context. Savalak Deepa also offered. So just to return to the slide very briefly. So what we can observe, the first ritual is observed in Patan and Kathmandu. And the second one is only observed in Patan, but it's only dedicated to the moon, not to Vasudhara, and unlike the prescription. And this ritual here is dedicated, the third one, by people in Patan to in theory, this is what happens here. But normally they dedicate it actually to Ushnisha Vijaya in reality. And then they perform also a rebirthing ritual, which is quite amazing when they turn 100. But that I have to show you another occasion. That's too much information in a sense. The really intriguing bit for me here, let me just try to unclutter this a little bit. So the idea is that there are 3 old age rituals. Number 1 and number 3 is really performed in Patan. And number 2 is actually folded into with the seeing of the 1000th noon in Patan. But interesting, people in Patan do not, for this particular ritual, ever produce an icon. And nor do I know of any icon from any collection that would hail from Patan, only in Kathmandu. So there is an intriguing and startling variation in practice that I can't account for well. But what's really important is to pay attention to this. Finally, coming back to here, so the seeing of 1000th full moon is not only a Newar thing, it's also performed by Parbatya Hindus in Nepal and by people from elsewhere. It's also prescribed in the Brahmanical Grahya Sutra literature. There's also another ritual which is performed when 60 years have been completed, and the Newars don't do that, but Hindus often do it, in particular in India. And looking at these old age rituals, of course, it begs the question, where do they come from? How did the Newars come up with all of this stuff? What are the origins? And on the one hand, we see that they map onto Dharani deities, goddesses, which is, of course, a Buddhist provenance. On the other hand, we can see here that they can also relate to comparable rituals performed in the Hindu or Brahmanical realm. And also, sometimes these rituals are known bhīmarathārohaṇa. Also, the 60 years is known as Ugrarata Shanti. Shanti, of course, means pacification. And that's exactly what happens in the first Bhīmaratha ritual. So it is indeed a pacification ritual. So when studying these rituals, it behooves us to look at texts, do field work, look at objects, artifacts, read their inscriptions. Also pay attention to differences between Kathmandu and Patan. Also pay attention to variation within these 2 different areas or ritual traditions. And also be very much aware of what non-Buddhist Hindus do. So just to show you briefly, the same ritual, Bhīmaratha, is also performed by Hindus, Newar Hindus. This is at the outskirts in Kathmandu by a Kathmandu Brahmin family. This is a very eminent Brahmin priest, Aishwayal, who unfortunately is no longer alive. And the idea here is again that the deities, the planetary deities, the same set of planetary deities is propitiated. The lady here is a widow, and on the rata, she took along her husband as a widower. So you can see here how she worships or propitiates each of the planetary deities in a kind of mandala like setup. And also on that occasion, she worships the deities, the Hindu deities of longevity. Intriguingly, let me just very briefly show you this. Intriguingly, in this ritual, this is the third Janko performed in Patan. Actually, each of these signs of Mangalam, signs, auspiciousness, are also are identified with the 8 Hindu deities of longevity. Again, I would not call this syncretism, but definitely a certain amount of boring and crossover. So I apologize. For those of you who are still hanging in, I'm grateful for your attention. I apologize that there's so much material, and I'm afraid I may have lost some of you. So I'm very happy to revisit the slides or expand upon what I've been trying to talk about. The least I hope to have been able to show you this is wonderful material, engaging, rich material, and waiting to be studied. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. This is really amazing, really wonderful. Many of us have walked the streets of Kathmandu or attended some of these rituals without knowing what exactly was going on. So this gives us something to work with. There are some questions. We could possibly look, have everybody who is willing open their camera so that you have a sense of community. Maybe you can stop sharing your screen if you want.
Certainly, yes, certainly, with pleasure.
Great. So we'll work with community discussion here. I know, Aaron, you've asked a question on the chat box, so I'm gonna invite you to, I'm looking for you to unmute. Sorry, coming.
Yes, hi.
Great.
Thank you for this fascinating talk. And my question is, are there any circumstances under which these old age ritual images would have been removed from the house shrine or disposed of, or where worship would have stopped?
I don't say, well, obviously what happened at some stage, they ended up to be circulated as artistic objects, so that many museums in the Western world have objects like this. And I don't think necessarily that they were stolen, but they may have been sold off. Normally, I think a traditionally minded family would have great reservations about selling these objects. So I called my talk Iconic Rituals, and I haven't really owned up to that title, except for a silly wordplay. So these rituals really in many ways are iconic. They're performed publicly. They serve as an occasion to affirm the prestige of a family. They allow the elders to be celebrated, and they allow also the sons to be good sons and to honor and celebrate the elders. Afterwards, particularly in Patan, the house is decorated, painted outside. The main door is painted with the 5 Buddhas, and alongside they actually paint the Mangalam. And very interestingly, they also glue the paper that the priest or the astrologer will have issued on the occasion. They also glue it to the wall. So there are occasions of great prestige, and I certainly think part of these commemorative paintings is to preserve for posteriority. And as we all know, the Newars have a very, very keen sense of history. So I think the only occasion that they would leave a family collection when the family disintegrates and when they can profitably be sold off. But I showed you two of these paintings. Both of them I chanced upon in private collections, and I wouldn't call them collections. They were both cases. They were objects that were still used in the puja room, and they had no qualms bringing them down to showing me. They probably would have felt more qualms about me stepping into their puja room, but they were very happy for me to see these objects. And, we could, of course, collectively deplore the trade with such objects. And I'm, very much do deplore when objects are stolen, particularly these days. And I've joined hands in repatriation of these objects. On the other hand, I must admit, many of these objects preserved, they probably would no longer be extant if they hadn't at some stage been brought out of the country. So it's always a two-sided sword. But that's a very different conversation. Definitely these days, the Nepalese are perfectly able to take care of their own antiquities. Actually, some of these paubas survive in the Chowni Museum, another one in the Patan Museum. And they're very well aware of the great, of how precious they are, not only in financial terms, but also religious or historical terms. So nowadays, there's really no excuse for taking them out of the country, which of course is also illegal, as you know, when an object is, I don't know what exactly it is it 50 plus years or something like this, they cannot be taken out of the country.
You have one more response, Erin?
No, thank you. That's very helpful and interesting to know. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's great that you're mentioning restoration, renovation, and preservation, because we have two. I know of two people in our group here who are actually really experts at this. We have Swasti, who is with us, and also Anne Scheftel. So if any of you would have questions, these are really great people who can help us with preservation of this material. There is a question from Swasti Gayasta with us. So would you like to ask your question directly?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Dian, and thank you, Professor Rospatt. You mentioned about the 8 Ashtamangal symbols being related to the 8 deities of longevity, and I was really intrigued by that because I really looked quite a bit into the Ashtamangal symbols, and I never found that connection. So I found that very interesting. So if you could expand a little bit on it, I would be very happy to know.
Well, at some stage, what I've been doing is looking at these paintings and chancing upon the paintings as a kind of extension of my field work and my study of ritual texts. And I own Kunzang Lama's generosity and knowledge. the fact that the Ashtamangalas are not only on these kind of old age rituals. So I was inclined to interpret their presence in the light of the fact that they play a very important role in the old age rituals. The ratas are typically adorned with paper and flags depicting the 8 Mangal signs. So they're definitely there. And also when the throne for the elders is made, of course, this has to be carefully done with rice and then and you know, the basque mat, circular mat on top, and then they put in gold. They put depictions of the different mangalas. So they're very much there and present. And much more really important there, the third Janko as it's celebrated in Patan. That's dedicated to Ushnisha Vijaya, and so the surrounding Ushnisha deities are identified at that moment with the Ashtamangalas very explicitly. And at least in one particular textbook that I've seen, when these Ashtamangalas invoke, they're also invoke the Ashtachiranjavis of the Hindu tradition, Parashurama and so on. Mainly Pauranic deities who are known for be almost not immortal, but basically ever living, so to speak. It's only one particular text where I've seen this. And I think there's also an identification in the same context of the Ashtamangalas with the Ashta Bodhisattvas. Of course, the traditions are very, flexible and very tempted when you have a set like 8 like this in a mandalaic configuration. Of course, there's a lot of, it's in many ways, it's a no-brainer to at least invest them with a meaning in such a way. Interesting question is whether then it actually translates into ritual practice so that these deities are invoked with their mantra. I don't know, Swasti, whether this answers your question. I do think, what you brought up, all of this warrants more research. And definitely what should be done, I haven't made it sufficiently clear. The study that Kunzang Lama has undertaken is very valuable because the paintings that she studies, they're very similar. They're just commissioned and they serve as an icon on the occasion of another very important, also an iconic ritual, I would argue, when a family produces over a month small little tsatsas or clay votive chaityas, and then which then may at the end actually serve as the socle for a chaitya. So it's important to bring this material into conversation with related material. And what's particularly intriguing, again, I wouldn't dare to make the same statement without having heard Kunzang make that remark, that the Newar tradition is quite unique in producing and producing such icons, both commemorative and icons which are principal protagonists as in the rituals. I mean, that's what I find so neat about the fact that the icons not only commemorate a ritual in picture and word, but they're actually a key element of the rituals.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, and as you mentioned, definitely there is a lot of research lacking, especially I think in Ashtamangals, and thank you for showing me direction to link it with the Ashta Chiranjeevi as well as the Ashta Bodhisattva. I think I will look into that. Thank you so much, and I'll reach out to you if I have any queries. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you.
So we have a few more questions coming up. I'm always struck by how art and ritual and religious life is so intertwined in Nepal so powerfully. It's almost like the artist it brings life into the painting. I remember Birat talking about that in one of the class. So it's a very powerful way of placing the art, the artist, the iconographic visuals as part of ritual and religious life. So let's see, the next person is Emma having a question.
Let me unmute. I can never get used to these online meetings and remembering to unmute. First of all, thank you ever so much. I've here and I found it fascinating because on my last visit to Nepal, and my only visit to date, my guide Mukta was saving up for his mother's 88th ceremony and was saying what a big deal it was in Nepal and also what a huge deal it was for the whole family and also the expense of it. But my question is also whether the Nepalese have young, middle-aged and old, and at what stage do you tip over between them? At what stage do you become middle-aged and at what stage do you become older or senior?
Well, biologically speaking, of course, they have all of these stages, but ritually speaking, the life cycle follows what they have in India. And principally, everybody undergoes a series of sacralization rituals, and they culminate with the wedding. For women, their wedding is even more important than for men, not socially speaking, but they're also sacralize the bride in a way they don't quite do the same for the groom, because the groom is sacralized earlier. And all boys and girls undergo a ritual that is actually called Matsa Zanko. So Zanko is basically the term here. It's called Jato, old folks Zanko. But between between marrying and between this old age ritual, I'm not really aware of any particular ritual. Of course, birth of children becomes very important, but it's not ritualized in quite the same way. So there is the ritual presentation of newborn children to the parents, but that's not quite the same.
So
it is, if I may just add this, so this, the sacralization of old age, it's quite peculiar what the Nepalese doing. The idea to have apotropaic rituals, and maybe also to honor elders, just like we do when we throw a big party on the occasion of the 75th birthday of our parents. So maybe that's not so special, but the sacralization that even goes as far as deification, I'm not aware of anything quite like this in India. I've definitely looked a lot. Actually, if you called somebody in Bengali bhīmarathārohaṇa, it doesn't mean you honor the person as somebody, oh, wow, that person has undergone this ritual. It's a sign of honor, but actually it means somebody who's become dement. You say this for dement old people who are slightly losing this mental. So it's a terrible insult in Bengali, while referencing somebody as bhīmarathārohaṇa, you wear your earrings to show for it, it's actually an honor. So this is something peculiar to the Nepalese tradition. And you're absolutely right about the expenses this entails, and how important it is for prestige and how much pride the family takes it. And what really happens on the occasion of these rituals, different generations are drawn together. They're not only the natis, but they're also pannati and kannatis, so whatever called the great-grandchildren, great-great-great-grandchildren, so all generations. And often these are very, very large families, and a lot of family drama has happened over the past 88 years or whatever. And it's really interesting how these rituals can be used as occasions for healing, because the family wants to come together again, but then there's all this past, and then there are all these kind of things that once upon a time happened. But these are the occasions when families, if they manage, actually manage to come together again.
I found it really interesting because his mother was a widow, and she had decided to move in with him and his 2 children because he no longer lived with his wife. So she'd sort of taken over being the senior female in the household and bringing the grandchildren up, for which he was hugely thankful. But it was just fascinating the level of reverence she was given. And I thought it was lovely when I'd seen how widows got treated in India and how they were sort of disenfranchised and disempowered and put on the outside of everything. And it was just lovely to see her as a widow having this really central role and being absolutely revered.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So what happens, as you know, widows in traditional Hindu society, but also in Nepalese, so once they've become widows, they're not meant to wear gold finery, they're not meant to put on gold sari, but this all stops on that occasion. So as you've seen in the also on the Hindu side, on the Buddhist side, the widows are celebrated, and they're celebrated in their wedding outfit, and indeed they're honored on that occasion. Actually, Patan, this would have led too far for this talk, but in Patan they even perform when somebody turns 100 years old, a very intricate rebirthing ritual where the 100-year, the centenarian is placed into huge earthen clay vessel, and where they kind of enact the rebirth, a really amazing ritual. Normally, it's women who turn that old, because women just happen to live longer than men. So certainly, I think you have a point that in these particular rituals, women play a more prominent role than they probably would have if they were part of a ritual tradition in Bihar or UP.
Thank you.
Indian friends for that remark.
So I'd be right in saying that 77 is the age that you're aiming for. Your first big, after marriage, after children, your first big moment is 77.
Yes, I mean, in a sense, yes. In a sense, yes. But of course, the principal idea is that this is a very critical age, and you better take due care when you have all these 7 lining up, and they would flip over into the it, and you're into the 8. You're entering the territory of 8. But at the same time, the rituals are not only apotropaic and not only protective, they're very, very clearly a celebration of old age and a deification of the elders. And they really, really get honored. And I've sat through many, many performances of these rituals. And there's no doubt about that they were enjoyed by the elder ladies or the elder gentlemen. In theory, so they are not meant to be part of the organization. They don't bear part of the expenses. And they shouldn't be, it should all be performed on behalf of them. And so in theory, the sons should be kind of do it almost a little bit as a surprise. I mean, not completely, but almost. That's the kind of idea. But in my observation, these rituals are not performed when the elders are dement of physically not fit. I mean, as we all know, if you sit through a ritual, no tea, no food until you got up in the morning, it'll be late in the afternoon until you're relieved from this. So, it's definitely not something you would perform for somebody who's not in good shape and who wouldn't enjoy it.
Thank you so much. I've got a mother in her 70s and a father in his 80s. I think I'm going to be absolutely broke. I'm going to have to phrase what I tell them about all of this talk very, very carefully.
Definitely you should fold the ritual into one. They should not be celebrated separately for the elders. It's also in some way, in an oblique way, it serves to affirm or reaffirm the marriage bond. Remember, the widow or widower takes along the deceased partner in the form of a vessel, and it's always performed in unison. So if the widow, typically the widow is younger, no, the wife is younger. If she performed it once her husband turns 77, so when she hits that age, she doesn't re-perform it. So you only do it once. So the idea is, if you've been a single all your life, that's a different matter. But of course, as we all know, that's not the ideal. The ideal is to be wedded in some way, and in some ways, this can be, it's also partly about reaffirming the marriage bond, even beyond this life.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Emma. We have 3 more questions. So,
if I may just add briefly, my colleague and friend Ellen Kuhn, the daughter of the once upon a time US ambassador to Nepal, she made sure to perform this ritual for her parents, principally for her father, who of course knew it from his time in Nepal. So certainly performing, Emma, performing for your parents, you wouldn't be the first one to do this for non-Nepalese parents.
Very nice. So Birat, Sam, and Abhijit. So Birat first.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Professor, for the beautiful talk. And I got many out-of-box insight from your talk today. I have a small piece of information and a small question.
Please.
About the information is that the Vasundhara ritual that's said to be done in Patan during the second Jambu, that has been performed, and the gurus, the priests now who are in their 60s have performed the ritual. But I haven't seen the manuscript, but they have explained me the outline of how they would do the second Jambu with the Vasundhara Mandala and the Homa in the day, and the evening they do the Sahasrachandra Darshan with the Lakpati. So that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So you're absolutely right. I've actually been told precisely the same that you've been told. The fact is, I've just never seen it for myself, and I prefer to see things. But I think you're right that the way it would be done then with performing it for Vasudhara during the day and doing the Sahasra Chandra in the evening. It still shows a little bit of the deviation of the pattern. The idea is that Vasudhara is performed at 88. But I appreciate what you've seen, and if you have more details, I'd be very grateful if you could email me with this.
Yeah, I've met some priests who have done that, so I could try to get more information for them. And my question is, as you have said, like
Yeah, you know, if you talk to the priests, what's really interesting, I mean, I've been told the same, that I don't, you know, it's not that I distrust the information. I'm certainly, I have no doubt, no reason to disbelieve this. It would be of great interest to me to see on the basis of what they do this. It doesn't, of course, necessarily have to be an old Tyasafu or an old text. The Nepalese tradition is incredibly creative and in flux and innovative. And so the last thing that I would, as an outsider, do say, oh, it's not in the old text, how dare you do this? Actually, I would say wonderful, you continue to innovate and you continue to, in a sense, to reconcile you know, the Chaurasi in 84 on the one hand, and the need to worship us. It's great you do this. So that would be my answer. But to repeat the point, I mean, if there is any kind of scriptural basis, that would of course be interesting to me.
So my question is also related to the comment you have just made about. So which is how old can the manuscripts are? So since we don't know, maybe the paintings can also be of the help that how old can this tradition of celebrating the old age ritual or Zangku can be dated?
So that's a very good question. So the oldest text that I am aware of is a palm leaf manuscript dated, if I remember correctly, to Nepal Samvat 499. So it'll be 1379 probably, or 1318, depending on the months. And interestingly, from this time, we have a few paubas of the kind that I didn't show you here. There are a couple of old sun mandalas, Surya mandalas, also Chandra mandalas, that Pradipaditya Pal has basically claimed, and it's not a claim, it's not a stupid, it has argued or suggested that they were commissioned on the occasion of this bhīmarathārohaṇa ritual. So the idea being the first one is of the sun and the second one of the moon, just as it's in Patan. So in that case, these scroll paintings, these paubas, go back to the late 14th century. And the oldest text suggesting anything like this goes back to the 14th century. This material is not really Buddhist. The text definitely is not Buddhist, but the Surya Mandala that I have in mind, which is at the Metropolitan in New York, it actually shows the officiating priest at the bottom, and the officiating priest wears a Vajracharya crown. So it seems that this ritual there is performed by a Vajracharya, but this doesn't mean that the judgment has to be Hindu. There are some rituals that Shrestras, though normally, of course, Hindu, would actually prefer Gurujus, Buddhist Gurujus perform. I think I've heard that the Zanko is among a possible exception. Just as I've shown you, a Brahmin is a legit kind of recipient of dana. And to some degree, I think it's also possible that you can draw upon the service of a Vajracharya priest. And this is not syncretism. A Vajracharya priest will invoke Buddhist deities with Buddhist mantras. A Hindu priest or Rajopataya priest will invoke Hindu deities with Hindu mantras. This is not syncretism. Of course, the traditions influence each other. It would be amazing if they didn't. I mean, all of us know how Nepalese Newars live at close quarters, and of course they do. But as far as I'm concerned, the label of syncretism should be used with great caution, and it normally doesn't fit the situation.
Thank you, Professor, for the information.
Yeah, thank you very much for your remark. And as I said, I'd be very grateful for further information if you can email that to me.
Sure.
Thank you for answer, and thank you for question. I'm always interested, you seem to be very strong in underlying the fact that it's not syncretism, and you make a distinction between a conversation within the culture, it seems, and syncretism where people do not make the difference between the tradition. Is that what you're meaning by syncretism? Or
could I follow up on that, because that was actually what my question is about?
oh, perfect.
That same question. Yeah. I agree in the case of these rituals that have many parallel aspects in the involvement of Brahmins and Vajracharyas in shared rituals. But what about like the case of maybe? Would you consider maybe to be something that could be considered syncretistic?
Of what you have to say that you mean of Mepi?
Mepi Ajimaya.
Yeah.
I would put that forward as, would you?
Well, I would, yeah. I don't know all that much about Mepi. Now I'm going to give an answer that I'm saying something which I wouldn't write necessarily. So to my mind, of course, Mepi, as you know, in the Buddhist context, there's the identification with Yogambara. And I don't know precisely how Mepi Dyoma would be identified with a Sanskritic Shaivite or Shakta goddess, probably Shakta goddess. But to my mind, when you come to the layer of Ajima goddesses, that I would call autochthonous, indigenous Newar deities that don't necessarily have a pronounced Sanskrit identity, and they don't have a Sanskrit language liturgy that surrounds them. Very often their practitioners are not high castes, Rajopatyayas or Vajracharyas. So I do think that at that point the traditions meet the elite Buddhist and the elite Hindu tradition, Shaiva Shakta tradition. They meet there, but that meeting, I wouldn't call that meeting there syncretism. To my mind, this is a different pole that we have to always be identify with due care when we talk about Hindu religion. So, for me, there is, this autochthonous pole, elite Buddhist practice, and elite Shaivite Shakta practice in the Hindu realm. And so the fact that these three poles meet, but they are distinct. For me, syncretism would be if they suddenly merged and coalesced and the meeting resulted in something new. That would be syncretism for me. And that, to my mind, doesn't happen. I mean, I realize that you have to look at each phenomenon of Newar religion carefully. And probably at some stage there would be some phenomena where I would have to concede that one could possibly usefully use that category. But normally in the vast majorities, I think it's ill-advised to use this. And the early scholars of Nepalese religion just didn't know better. They didn't understand well enough how Buddhist Nepalese Buddhism is. They kind of were misled by appearances to think that this is just, Hinduism but in word, but it's not, as both of us know.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank you, Sam. Abhijit. who's gone, I guess. So his question was, is there something other than longevity to do with future birth, for future birth? Is there such rituals for future births? Was his question.
Well, to my mind, you know, having a Sukhavati Lokeshwar feature at the base of the stupa, again, I owe this identification to Küntsang Lama, and it makes perfect sense in the context of the bhīmarathārohaṇa rituals. The aspiration of rebirth in Sukhavati, I've also found elsewhere in the rituals, actually somewhere in ritual manuals. So it does feature definitely also in rituals. Also, the kind of narrative that people develop around the rituals, they love to argue and explain that now we are taking them on the journey to the heaven. And once they join this chariot, this is almost anticipating their journey to paradise. So I've also, it's always interesting what people tell you about the rituals. So I've also been told by, I think, a very creative soul arguing that the chariots are kept afterwards carefully, because when somebody passes away, they're dismembered, and then they serve as a bier to carry the corpse to the cremation ground. So in this way, people will actually fly on the chariot to the cremation ground. Unfortunately, I've not been able to confirm this. Similarly, people, they argued some of the gas shawls used during the ritual are kept apart, and again, they will be used to basically dress the corpse in it, so that again, they would actually reenact that journey they already anticipated during the bhīmarathārohaṇa ritual. So definitely there is the idea of this narrative. But we have to be careful, just as a small example. So probably many of you know when the Ihi ritual is performed, when the Brahman ritual for the boys performed, or also when the Matsa Zanko is performed, very often there is a procession with a celebrated individual to all the temples close by, to the local Ganesh temple and so on and so forth. So one way of reading this yatra is that this is just happens to be there since this is a kind of sanskara. It's wonderful how the tradition is able to invest rituals with meanings. I'm very fond of this, but it would be stupid for us to be too functionalistic to say, oh, wow, they want the elders to fly to the heaven, and that's why they came up with ritual. I think it actually probably worked the other way around. And they had these Ratha rituals, and then, of course, yes, it makes perfect sense that the whole thing points to the beyond.
Great answer. I guess we could aspire to a future life in continuity with this this talk, as we talked at the beginning, right? Since there's so much to say about these, and I know you're doing research on this, you're continuing your research on this, and so as we're closing in for this talk, I would invite all of you to keep an eye, because we will host Professor Rospatt again, probably in class, on site in the fall. So please keep your eyes open, and we're going to try to actually do perhaps a online and on-site kind of version, So please keep in touch with us. If you're in Bodha, you're always welcome as soon as we open our doors. We want to thank you so fondly for this talk, and wishing you the best, Professor Rospatt, on your research. I don't know if you have a few closing remarks for us.
Well, a lot of my research I've written up already. There is a paper that is freely available online. Also, as many of my work on academia.edu, and I very much would like to expand the kind of iconography exploration here, and also talk about some of the aspects of the Zankos I haven't dealt with in more detail. And I'm grateful, Diane, for the invitation to talk in late of October. And it would be wonderful if this happens, at least for me and for some of you, in person rather than remotely.
Great, thank you so much. And if you have any other questions about preserving such artwork or restoring, please contact Swastikayasta directly. Or you could also reach Anne Shaftel. She does a lot of restoration work outside of Nepal. Inside of Nepal, she comes also. So for all of this, you can talk to them about personal consideration if you have icons or paubas, work of art. And I wish you the best. Please stay safe, and looking forward to have you again at the public talks.
Thank you very much, Diane, and I do hope to see many of you again later this year.